Well, one of the biggest misperceptions is to believe that the government is the wherewithal, that the law enforcement agency is the total solution to community disorder. No, that begins, and that's where I teach on criminal deviance. All crime is local. That means it begins with inside of your homes. And that's why you have to move towards a younger workforce, as the old African proverb says, old man for counsel, young man for war.
And when you look at the present situation in terms of the justice system, in terms of the dysfunctionality in the police department, in terms of what's happening in corrections, what hope do you see a bright shining star? Do you see the light at the end of the tunnel anytime soon?
You, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, I've never met this man before a day in my life. This gentleman contacted me and asked me to come on this show and to discuss these issues. And I don't say that to put him on the spot, but it's like our conversation is universally flowing. You literally were in my brain like you were reading.
Audacious Rebel.
Welcome to the path of the Audacious Rebel, where we challenge the norms, question the system, and explore how crime can be a catalyst for transformation. Today, we have a powerhouse in law enforcement and justice reform, Charles D. Rambo. With over 30 years in law enforcement, Rambo is not just a veteran officer, he's a strategist, a reformer, an educator who has shaped public safety at every level. As a retired lieutenant from the Fulton County Sheriff's Office, he has operated in the trenches of law enforcement, corrections, intelligence, and policymaking. But what truly sets him apart is his commitment to transformation. He's a man who didn't just enforce the law, he helped rewrite its impact. As National Vice President of the International Brotherhood of Police Officers, he influenced public safety policy at federal, state, and local levels. As an intelligence analyst trained by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, he co-led a task force to suppress gang activity, tackling crime at its root. As a reformer, he spearheaded groundbreaking humanitarian reforms in the Fulton County Jail, transforming one of the most problematic detention centers in Georgia and leading it out of federal consent decree. Rambo is also a certified senior instructor who has trained thousands of officers, shaping the next generation of law enforcement professionals with a focus on police legitimacy, procedural justice, and ethical policing. Beyond all of this, he understands that crime is not just about arrests and incarceration. It's about deeper societal issues, from economic conditions to mental health, community trust, and systemic policy failures. That's why his voice is sought after in major news stories and legal cases. Today, we'll dive deep into his insights, experiences, and solutions, exploring everything from crime trends to policing reforms to the future of justice on a global scale. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an absolute honor to welcome to the path of the Audacious Rebel, Charles D. Rambo.
Well, good morning, and thank you, sir, for bringing me to your esteemed platform. It is an honor to be here with your listeners and followers.
Mr. Rambo, your history is really amazing. When I started to read up on you, I said, but apparently they got the movie from you.
Well, listen, my birth name actually is Rambo. It's not something that was made up. I was actually born with that on my birth certificate in 1968. Bear in mind, before the movie Well even came out, before there was even a character, before there was even a star named Sylvester Stallone. So that means there's an alignment in terms of a calling that is placed on your life, that the Creator gives you a name to be able to operate in a future time such as this, where such reform and audacious rebelness is necessary.
And it drives me to ask the question, what would have been the motivating factor or the catalyst that led you into this sphere, into this field of research and work and whatnot?
Well, sir, believe it or not, law enforcement was the furthest thing from my Doppler radar. I originally wanted to be a funeral director. I'm originally from Gary, Indiana, born and raised. And from that, when I left Gary, Indiana on a trajectory, I began my career going into the military in the United States Air Force as a mortuary specialist. My goal was to own and to operate a funeral home. And well, long story short, in terms of how I wound up in Atlanta, because even Atlanta was not on my mark. Not saying it was a bad place, it was just I had my aspirations set going to Texas. And again, the creator has a way of changing your plans. The best
Mm,
way to give God a good laugh is to tell him that you have a plan. And that's when you will see that everything in your life will change, especially when you submit and you make yourself willing to what his plan is for your life. I'm not going spiritual, excuse me, I'm not going religious, but this is a spiritual calling, knowing that I did not have the educational pedigree. I did not have the desire to go into anything relating towards criminal justice. And when I wound up in Atlanta, the path just pushed me on to becoming a law enforcement officer after graduating from mortuary school. And once I became adhered to what the calling was on my life at that time, then that's when I began to see how the Creator began to reveal and manifest and make me what I was supposed to be. All of those wonderful things that you said, I could not have been any of that without the Creator instilling those things into me, becoming an instructor, becoming one of the most sought after executive protection agent by uh, Hollywood stars as well as local politicians. I could go on and on and on. But most important was to have the gravity and the credibility to be able to relate to the Atlanta area where I am not from and
mm.
to be able to come in with some type of authenticity. It's almost like walking through the valley of the shadow of death. People know that you're coming because they already heard about your name. They already know what your work and what you're there to do. And uh, I have to just say, I don't know how to even respond to that with uh, giving acumens and that I have degrees and this, that, and the other. As they asked of Jesus, who is this man who hath not our letters but is most learned? And I've just been following the path in terms of what the Creator has put on my life to do. And that's where you can see this magnanimous work that you have described.
Tell me something. What are some of the misconceptions, the key misconceptions you think the public has about crime and law enforcement, and how do these misconceptions affect real world policing?
Well, one of the biggest misperceptions is to believe that the government is the wherewithal, that the law enforcement agency is the total solution to community disorder. No, that begins, and that's where I teach on criminal deviance. All crime is local. That means it begins with inside of your homes. That person that you have with inside of your home, it's called primal environments. Primal environments where the parent is the first steward of ensuring that a child has what he needs in order to be successful in life, being able to hold them to what we call rules. If they become rule breakers and there's no order, there's no discipline, there's no correction, then by the time that kid turns around and has been labeled as a misfit, then they grow into this mindset. I want to go ahead and put that into perspective. Mens rea. That's what we say in proving a crime. It's not the act itself. You have to first prove the internal element of the guilty mindset. So everything begins from the state of the mind, the condition that that child, that adult was reared in, not just only in homes, in churches, in communities. Where did those persons take the responsibility before they got to the ultimate stage of the criminal justice system as a lawbreaker? Now that's where we have to get involved, and that usually involves some type of punishment. Can there be what is known as restorative justice? Of course there can, but there's no restorative justice per se for violent crimes such as rape, as well as for murder and other heinous crimes. But for those things that we can correct, we still have to return people to the community. We still have to have that healthy support of those primal authorities that must take more responsibility for what comes out again of their communities.
Something you mentioned the home and that being, one of the main areas for culturing and conditioning the mind. And, last show, we had a psychologist on board. Her name was Dr. Cheryl Holmes. And one of the questions posed to her is, how can we break this cycle? Because we're seeing in the homes now where those who supposed to have the responsibility of parenting themselves are ill-equipped. So we have children being parents who are not aware of what it means to parent and nurture. So then the cycle continues. Those with the responsibility do not have the ability to nurture or to rear the mindset that is required for the society that we're looking at. How do you break that or fix that cycle, that generational issue that we're seeing here?
Well, I would come back and look at it from culture. Culture, particularly when I got to Atlanta, I began to deal more in a multicultural environment. And let me break it down from having worked inside of the Fulton County Jail. Um, when I came along in 1989, the statistics that alarmingly rang true, and this is not something that your audience can say that I just looked up on Wikipedia or that I looked at Boys on the Hood, what have you. No, this is actual upfront, close and personal interactions with inmates at the Fulton County Jail. 95% at that time, 95% of our jail's population were black males from the local regional Atlanta area.
Mm-hmm.
Now, watch where I'm going with this. When I looked at that number, I didn't see any Caribbean. I saw very few who came from up out of the islands. I saw very few that came from up out of, at that time, the large influx of Ethiopia. I didn't see a lot of that coming from Nigeria or from African nations or what have you. I saw that as the local population. So again, we have to look at, and I mean, I may get sticks and stones thrown at me through the comments, but what is in our culture? What are we teaching the children by culture? I mean, when I dealt with the Trinidadian and the Tobago Business Association, you could see that, you had stern mothers, you had stern fathers, you had discipline, you had order, you had that primal environment that did not even think about having their children to become a population at the Fulton County Jail or any local jail, not in no number of 95% of the population. So with that, I then looked at the total number of Hispanic. I looked at the total number of white, but most important, I even looked at our Jewish aspect. I can only remember maybe two or three persons who came to the county jail that came from the Jewish culture.
Hmm.
Again, what is being taught in these cultures or what is the connection? What is the tie to the community that these cultures have to the criminal justice system that keeps their children out and gives them second chances, as opposed to ours that get washed up and get sent down the road on a continuous basis. And that's where my work really, really began, having worked up on maximum security. And we're talking about during the drug war era. We're talking about when we had some like real dangerous cartel style activities going on. And these guys, essentially, because I spoke life into them, tough love, and they saw my authenticity, that the fact I was coming to them as a man and speaking to them with tough love, man values, man, you would be surprised that, as your psychologist said, the after effect that when I went into communities, my wife would tell you, we could go to some of the most roughest areas of Atlanta. I wasn't afraid, but my wife was new to me, and she saw these guys walking toward me with tats and looking like they might be menacing. These guys were walking up to me with their families, sir, hugging me, saying, "Thank you, man. Thank you for keeping us straight and making us responsible and giving us the values that we needed to get back out here in life. Man, I want you to meet my daughter. I want you to meet my son. Hey, y'all, this is Lieutenant Rambo. This is the dude that kept me straight." Well, that ain't the exact word they use, but this is the guy that kept us straight inside the jail. I said, "No, sir. You kept yourself straight. I just showed you the path forward." So again, the primal environment has to start back in the culture of the community and not inside of a county jail.
I hear that. It reminds me of the work by Professor Lawrence Harrison. I think he passed away now. One of his books, Culture Matters, where he did some tremendous research globally to identify what makes a nation developed as opposed to a continuous developing nation. And after tremendous research was conducted, they recognized the primary factor would have been the culture.
Well, let me even throw back into that very quickly. And this is one of the most key critical that I learned even of the Jewish culture. When one of their young persons violates the law, members from that synagogue, particularly the rabbi and the elders, will go to the court and are now, watch this, and here's a key word for the community to now pay attention to: ties to the community. What ties to the community do our youth have that they would have someone that could come in and vouch for their character, to show that we will take responsibility for what he did? And if we cannot correct him with inside of the community or with inside of the synagogue, then we will bring him back for retribution by the courts. But give us an opportunity to first correct his behavior. And you very seldom will see a Jewish child coming back to the court system for any type of sentence. So with that,
the whole community there responsible for raising the child, the whole African adage where the community is responsible for raising the child. So we've seen that lost in black communities and other defranchised communities. But how do you reinstill such values that will perpetuate that cohesion in a community? How do you reestablish or reinstill that?
in all honesty, and I don't want to sound misogynistic, but it's a responsibility that has been given to us by the Creator. It begins with manhood. It begins with men getting back involved into the lives of their children, holding their sons accountable. Where you have accountable sons, you now have daughters that are also following with inside of the same suit. I mean, hell, you've got a society that is labeled as bitches and hoes and niggers and so forth, so on. And I'm not being vile on your show. I'm just calling it out
It's being truthful.
because that has become the attachment of our identity. So wherever you see that at inside the community, that's what you disrespect. That's what you degrade, and that's what you become. So where is the fatherhood in this particular? And I say that coming even from growing up in a single parent home myself. But at the end of the day, um, law enforcement essentially has its role as the secondary stage, but we have to again come back. And I always would, when we would respond to calls for service, when we dealt with juveniles, the first thing I'm looking for is the parent. I'm looking for the parent for some culpability, some responsibility to say, hey, listen, at the end of the day, I was honestly glad that many parents were now beginning to be held accountable for some of the crimes that their children were committing. Why? Because there was an old adage that used to be aired on TV. It's 9 o'clock. Where are your children? Or Sheriff Sheehan in Cook County, Illinois, would say, speak to your children, talk to your children so that I don't have to. So again, the reinstallment of those things comes back to a partnership that law enforcement can get back with churches, with families, community centers, or what have you, but it doesn't require our 100% presence. Otherwise, you begin to wear down our utility and our presence and our functioning to be able to respond when there's real disorder.
Yeah, no, you have a kind of over policing, which would not
Correct.
perpetuate the result you want at the end of the day. You know, Charles, you spent over 30 years in law enforcement. Looking back, how has crime evolved over the decades, and what are some of the biggest changes you've witnessed, and above all, the biggest challenges you've faced?
Well, I am. I completed one of the toughest courses of my life. Probably, I think the top five in my class. I was amongst guys from the Department of State, from Homeland Security, you name it, from the federal level. Uh, I completed intelligence analyst course by the Department of Homeland Security. 2 weeks. I mean, when I tell you that course kicked my behind, it kicked my behind. But it really taught me a lot and correlated with what I was endeavoring into in gang intelligence. What I have seen as the biggest change is now what we call this hybrid crime, hybrid criminal activity, transactional um, criminal activity that is taking place across the globe, and it is more technologized than it was, say, back in my day or in our father's day or our grandfather's day. Of course, with time comes, innovation. But when the criminal element gets its hands on to it, now you have Bitcoin that you can hide your money over into. You have apparatuses that allow for criminals to conceal their identity on a moment's notice in order to avoid prosecution as well as apprehension. Uh, and that's a reality. But here is the scary part is that this isn't a proliferation amongst adult gang or adult criminal. This is now something that our children have attached themselves to. And they are now part of a whole worldwide network that can now use them as sleeper cells based upon the fact that they have access to your community, again, right there inside of your child's bedroom to potentially carry out some terrorist attack on behalf of a international organization or even a local organization, domestic wise. Uh, And the reason why this is of great concern is because the juvenile laws, particularly in Georgia, still is very careful about how they prosecute anything less than 17 years old.
Mm.
So with that, uh, a lot of our children are now becoming the masterminds, and that's the reason why you see them becoming so much involved in so much death and mayhem and large scale cash transactions, so forth, so on, because it has now become lucrative, particularly through internet and now even with this AI. AI, which could be for a good tool, could now also aid and abet in this whole transnational move towards crime that is undetected.
You know, it's something because this was a question I had to ask later on, and you just brought it up here because in looking at globalization and looking at technological advancements, AI, what we see with social media, and as you mentioned, transnational crime. Do you think that law enforcement is well equipped or on par to deal with these evolving changes and challenges that is now presented?
On a small scale, um, I believe that we prepare, again, actors, we prepare people for the, the skill as well as the knowledge and the abilities. But I don't think today's law enforcement agencies, because of so much dysfunction and because of well, I just sticking with that with so much dysfunctional management and toxic management that they're ready to embrace this generation that could come forward and be just as ready on a moment's notice to spring up at what I would have called as a counter hybrid policing culture. When I ran for sheriff, that was one of the keystones, well, should I say, talking points of my plan was to create a hybrid deputy workforce that would be able to respond to crime just as technologized as the criminal, and being able to respond in a timely fashion. But that takes a generational mindset of management that embraces that and is not intimidated by the character. I mean, hell, we just got to look 25, 30 years down the line. I'm not going to be here. So we have to prepare this next generation to be able to meet the needs of the time based upon their skill sets. And that's the reason why you get a lot of these kids that don't want to join law enforcement today. Yeah, they'll come in for the benefits, they'll come in for salary, but unless they're able to use their actual talents, their skills, but most important, that mens rea, that mindset in order to fight crime from a whole different level, we're always going to be behind the time.
Hmm. And that again will perpetuate the same dysfunctionality that you identified because if people are just becoming law enforcement, get joining law enforcement simply for the salary, then there's no heart. There's no heart, there's no passion, and then there may be those with the passion, but when you're in the environment now that is toxic and you have management that may not understand the evolving trends, then that tend to stifle a lot of the passions as well.
And that's why you have to move towards a younger workforce, as the old African proverb says, old man for counsel, young man for war. Yes, our mindset is still needed based upon patterns and past practices of what we know, of what did and what did not work. But at the end of the day, it has to fit according to what the time demands for change. So a lot of us old fossils, we get in the way of progress. And that's the reason. And anybody that's listening across the globe, I could be challenged on it. I've written manuals that have been approved for training. In fact, I taught uh, how to mentor the millennials. And many of my cadets then at that time, 10, 11 years ago, are now in positions of captains and majors, assistant chiefs. Some have even gone on applying to become chiefs because I was not jealous. I was not uh, hard hearted or was did not want to see them advance. It does more for my soul to see that they progress. So
Right.
until old fossils determine that their wisdom, well, let me say it this way, and I don't want to sound so long winded. What we have to understand with this young generation is that they don't give a hot damn about who you are or what you've done.
That's
What
true.
can you show me and how can you teach me from those examples? And if you can show me and teach me, show me the way and then get out of my way and I will come back and give you the end result.
Right.
What this generation is essentially saying, hey, at the end of the day, I need constant feedback. Again, we come back to that primal environment, not just criminal, but also coming into the workforce where they did not get the reinforcements that they needed from parental units. So now they are depending upon not leaders, but mentors. And when you can show them the way, get out of their way, and let them come back and give you the end result, you will have a person that will follow you, as Sun Tzu said, into the valleys of the deepest valleys of death. They will stand with you even in that deep, dark valley.
Charles, what you're speaking something there that really resonates with me. I mean, I myself have been in the police department for over 25 years, and exactly what you're saying is exactly what would have been observed. But it's wonderful what you're saying, but dealing with the reality and what presents itself, how do you shift what is taking place and bring it in alignment with what you're saying now?
It's going to take a new generation of leadership to bring that authentic alignment. Otherwise, we're going to get continuously stuck in the mud with status quo practices that, again, keep us behind the threat. Now, I'm a trainer, I'm a state certified senior instructor. And one of the key things, I'll give you a perfect example. Last week, um, I did a presentation on gang awareness up in the Georgia mountains for 150 community supervision, Department of Probation. And from the perspective that I trained them, they came in saying, I thought I was just coming here just to get 1 credit hour. You actually laid something on me that I can actually take back and apply. No matter how much I train, no matter how much you impart from your show, until the management structures allow for our ideas, the universal ideas to be put into place, it will always meet a stalemate because now you have to go out and try to meet the political policy of the prime minister or the public policy of the mayor or the public policy of some leader who has absolutely knows nothing about law
Mhm.
enforcement. So at the end of the day, those political policies will oftentimes get involved of real, true reform. I could teach it all day, desktop. I'll do it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But until you find agencies and governments that are willing to put authentic practices into place, it's going to stay the same. I unfortunately have to say that.
You know, when you look at crime, Charles, do you think that there are patterns that are universal in nature, regardless of country or region?
Well, when I come back and I think of that, I look at more or less not just constitution and state laws. I go back and I look at the fact that before these, there was what was called the fundamental law. Those values that the Creator instilled into you truth, justice, and equality in order for you to function as a sovereign man. Man has the right to exist in society and to be left alone, so long as he does not violate the rights of another. So when you look at the fact of stealing, yeah, that's going to be universal, because if I'm hungry and I have not gotten up off of my lazy behind fundamentally to provide for myself as the next man, then that's going to be something that follows me. If I don't know how to make myself decent and appropriate, to make myself attractive to a woman, that I in getting ready to involve myself over into some sexual assault, what have you. So these things flow from up out of man's desire to satisfy his life long his life's objectives, but he has no right to violate the rights of another in order to satisfy those things. I bring that from the sovereign, what's called the Golden Rule of Sovereigns by Emir de Vattel. Man cannot complain of how he's treated in terms of how he treats others.
Right. I concur 100%. And it identifies the fact that definitely um, there's more. What we need is more than just law enforcement to rectify what we're dealing with now. It spans much more than the justice system. You've trained thousands of officers and led major reforms in policing and corrections, Charles. What, in your opinion, you think are the biggest challenges that law enforcement officers face today? You did mention the dysfunction that exists within management and whatnot, but what do you think is the biggest challenges that law enforcement officers face today in preventing and solving crimes?
Right now, the biggest challenges, particular if I could use even in our local jurisdiction here in Fulton County, and I'm not being facetious, I'm not making fun of, it's a reality that existed even long before the current district attorney. The backup of the criminal justice system from cases that have not been prosecuted, that now brings persons into a overcrowded, I won't say over docketed, but a overcrowded criminal justice system where justice cannot be served. And because you have statutes of limitations on certain crimes, when those persons don't meet that statute of limitations, by law, by constitution, they're presumed innocent. They didn't get their day in court. Now they get an opportunity to go back free into the community as if they have not done anything. Well, here's the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is not the prosecutor. The biggest challenge is not the DA. The biggest challenge, again, comes from the law enforcement officer in their proper preparation of incident reports and cases that are so solid it can move through the criminal justice system. Remember, the state bears the burden of proof of proving your case beyond a reasonable doubt. There can be no questions. There can be no mistakes. Everything has to be exact. And most important, when there's swift justice inside of the system, that sends a signal into the community we can't do in Fulton County. We cannot do in Cobb County. We can't do in LA. We can't do in Chicago like we used to do, because these guys are exactly on point. We've gotten to the point, unfortunately, sir, to lazy policing, where we just write very bare minimum. We do very sloppy case preparation in terms of collection of evidence, the taking of statements, the investigation of cases, keeping track of witnesses that are all critical to a speedy trial under the Sixth Amendment. And these were things that I taught inside of my mock trial session that were attended even by judges as well as prosecutors and defense attorneys. And they said, man, this was the step in the right direction because they began to see a new generation of officers bringing more well prepared cases into their courtrooms. Things really began to start to shape up and to change a little bit between 2009 and 2016 in the Atlanta area based upon that type of training. So again, it comes back to the dysfunction with inside of law enforcement agencies at the managerial levels that they've got to hold officers, their supervisors, their investigators to higher standards of constitutional governance. There's nothing else that is going to suffice when you bring a case before the criminal justice system. If it does not meet constitutional muster, it is not good. As Johnny Cochran said, if it does not fit, you must acquit. And that's the biggest challenge that I see now as a backed up system, not because of criminals, but because of poor and improper casework.
You know, it's something you spoke about that because it ties into even the corrections. So the next question I'm going to ask is how effective do you think the current justice system is in rehabilitating offenders, and what alternatives could be explored? Recidivism is a global issue. How do you cut down on that percentage of recidivism and what is happening right now in corrections as you identify how overwhelmed the justice system may be?
Well, and again, you can look at the current state of our Fulton County jail here in Fulton County, Atlanta, that is now under a federal consent decree. And please, I am not going to go left or right. I'm going to stick down the middle so that we can stay consistent with what true rehabilitation looks like. You have to remember that when people come in from communities, they don't necessarily come from the best of conditions.
Right.
So when they don't come from the best of conditions, they are not expected to come into a condition that has been described as inhumane and so unconstitutional that it would not even be fit. It would not even be fit for a third world country. So again, now you get a mindset of a criminal or alleged criminal that comes in and feels that now I can do just as much as I want to inside of this jail than I did out there in the community. And when you don't have, and we can extend this to the Department of Corrections in Georgia that is now under a consent decree. You can look all across America as we speak now with malign influences of detention officers, deputies, and correctional officers that are just as much on the criminal side that are now bringing in illicit activities, drugs, and paraphernalia that does not contribute to a holistic environment that would make a person whole towards rehabilitation. You're saying rehabilitation, but now you're bringing the same things from the community. And then the people on the inside have control over those resources, not over just your correction staff, but also your managers. And I'm not just talking just here local. We're talking across the state. We're talking across the globe. So when we come back and now say to an inmate, we want to make you whole, well, rehabilitation does not begin with the criminal justice system. We can give you every opportunity. If I could tell you some of the people that I have helped get into rehabilitation services there at the jail, it would shock you. It would shock you. And I'm not going to reveal names of what have you, but at the end of the day is that what I held them to the accountability was I don't care anything about your celebrity status. I don't care nothing about your money, so forth, so on. Rehabilitation begins with you. If you're not taking this serious, don't waste my damn time. Don't waste me putting you inside of a program that I know that is going to assist you to make you whole and to make you better. But then if we do rehabilitate that particular person, what are the outsources of community resources do we have to release that person into an environment that they now have an opportunity to span their wings and to go and fly and not ever come back to the jail again? So again, we can spend as much money into rehabilitation all we want to, but until that inmate takes it serious and until the criminal justice system, the corrections facilities restore true internal order and discipline inside of the jail, such as the Pecunia versus Martinez case law that says is that, hey, so long as jails are run with internal order and discipline that is not patently unreasonable to constitutional violations, we don't care how you run your jail. Just run it with some humanity. And that's what we did from 2009 to 2016 in turning men back to their communities. Man, I remember one particular uh, guy. This almost brings me to tears sometimes. It's kind of comical. I was getting ready to go into Target and I saw this car circling around in the parking lot. And it was a little hoopty. And I could tell it had about 6, 7 folk in it. I was like, okay, it must be a case of the parking lot. I'm always code yellow going in. Not uniform, I'm in my plain clothes. All of a sudden, just before I get to the door, this car pulls up on me and abruptly stops. And the guy jumps out and again jumps out and embraces me. He's got all of his kids. He was like, hey, man, listen, I want you to know what you all were doing with us inside of the jail. It did not go to waste. I'm back out here with my family. I got my kids or what have you. I got my boys, my girls, or what have you. I don't want to see 901 Rice Street again. So it really has to come back to some holisticness in terms of how the inmate is receiving that authentically from the people who are providing that service. I'm sorry if I get long winded, but I don't get very many opportunities to answer authentic questions like yours.
But Charles, I could concur with what you're saying. I've also been in corrections for 5 years prior to being a police officer, and I mean, working with what you call criminals, you realize they're human too. And as deviant as some of them may be, when you really sit with some of them and you understand the way they may have been cultured and the environment that would have shaped them, and you really have some deep conversations with them, you realize there are many instances they can be reached. But if, of course, you deal with all of them as one broad brush, you're not going to have the same effect, especially when they're of the view that nobody cares about them, then they don't have to care about anybody. Now, when you look at you and what you have done and the type of person that you have been, you could have seen the impact and how it would have influenced others. But how many others are like you? And when you look at the present situation in terms of the justice system, in terms of the dysfunctionality in the police department, in terms of what's happening in corrections, what hope do you see a bright shining star? Do you see the light at the end of the tunnel anytime soon? Or
You, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, I've never met this man before a day in my life. This gentleman contacted me and asked me to come on this show and to discuss these issues. And I don't say that to put him on the spot, but it's like our conversation is universally flowing. You literally were in my brain like you were reading. You were reading. My next response is that um, I'm originally, again, from Gary, Indiana, and I'm going to give you just a very, very quick little backdrop um, without going too deep. But we can come back another show and discuss this. I grew up in the 23rd 2300 block of Jackson Street, literally across from the Jackson 5.
Mm.
Uh, I did not know them personally. My mom grew up with them, and I was able to reconnect them at a show here in Atlanta. And just to see them come back together brought great joy. But I remember hearing all of the stories uh, of Joe Jackson and how you said earlier the deviance model. Mr. Jackson was not one who tolerated a lot of foolishness. He got that many children inside of a two-bedroom home. In a, so to speak, working class neighborhood, you had to have some type of order. But this was not just a gentleman who took responsibility for his children. He took responsibility like other men, Mr. Pinson, Mr. Evans, Mr. Gunn. All of these guys, they were the ones who held our communities together. And if it were not for the love of these men, I would have been a wayward child that otherwise could have gone down the path of the criminal justice system. I experienced a life of semi poverty. I experienced things that I should not have experienced. I came across, if I did an audit of my life, I could say that I should not have gone through some of the things that I went through as a child, but as I now look at it as a man, it was preparation. It was a building of character. It was a building of an authenticity that people see in me that when I speak to them in forums, I'm not talking from a PowerPoint presentation. I'm not talking from some Harvard study. I'm speaking from real life experiences. I can go anywhere in this community, even being 10 years retired from the sheriff's office, get invited to go into some of the toughest communities right now, and some of the OGs and many of the guys and some of the younger ones even would say, "Man, we heard about you. You didn't play, man. You were uh, you you had a no nonsense. You were firm, but you were fair, as we heard what have you. So we know not to play with you." Again, people see your value when they know that you have the battle scars that matches up to their experiences. And that's what brings me to the table. I'll tell you, I had an interview with Judge Joe Brown back this summer, and it
I
was,
saw it.
hmm,
I saw it. I saw it.
oh, yeah, listen, man, when that man said to me at the end, well, when I went off the show, when I came back and I heard about it, I literally cried the tears of a crocodile. He is the most renowned legal expert that said that, um, you know, he has gravitas. Whenever he steps into a room, people stand up and pay attention to what he is saying. That's not because of my last name. That's not because of my career. It's because of the authenticity that I speak from the creator and my life experiences, as well as trying to help humanity. And when I heard the judge, Judge Brown don't give no compliments like that very easily. So to hear him to say that, show that there's value in my work, there's value in my suffering that I'm able to now pour out to other young men to be an example to them, not just to young men, but also to law enforcement, young law enforcement, people in the community. I still spend time in churches. I'll just randomly stop somewhere and just start talking with the natives. I don't need to be elected as sheriff in order to be effective in communities. My name, my reputation that God has bestowed upon me helps me to still carry a mantle and weight that is much greater than that designation.
Charles, this conversation has been nothing short of amazing. We've explored crime, justice reform, and the future of policing. But before we close, I want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Looking back on your career, what is the most important lesson you've learned about crime, justice, and humanity?
I heard the question. You got me on a pause. Um, the most important lesson that I feel that I've learned about justice and humanity, if I could take it back, and this actually is what gave me my launch into running for sheriff.
Mm,
And hear me when I say this, is that if you go back, and this is a historical lesson, again, I give biblical principles, not for religious value, but for historical lessons. If you go back and you look in the book of Daniel, third chapter, the third verse, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, boys, young men, were there before Nebuchadnezzar, getting ready to be ostracized for a crime that they did not commit. Nebuchadnezzar, and they are named in the third chapter, had made the governors, the princes, the counselors, the treasurers, and the sheriffs. The term sheriff, the person of justice, the person who could have brought true justice in that situation, was the sheriff of that era. I'm not making this up. You can find it in the third chapter. The sheriff was on bended knee rather than doing his job. Rather than doing his job, was on bended knee with his face so deep into the dirt that even the boys saw that their primal authorities, the criminal justice system, was not standing up for them. The counselors, the prosecutors, their defense attorneys, nobody wanted to come up against Nebuchadnezzar in order to state their case. So the boys, young men had to take upon themselves to stand in the presence of a ruler and said, if these won't do it, if they won't do it, then we will just rely upon our God in order to save us. Watch this. That was a slap in the face at every adult of Babylon at that time, that they allowed for their children to be sold through a criminal justice system that otherwise should have been standing up for justice against Nebuchadnezzar. So when I look back upon what the Creator has instilled into me, since I had no desire to be in law enforcement, and then put me into a position of learning about the true nature and the power of what a sheriff could do, I stood up on that particular principle. I stood up on that sovereignty. And I thank God again for allowing me to do all of those things that you said that I did. I have to go back and recheck some of those things. But nonetheless, you get so focused on the vision, you don't get a chance to look at of the residual of the things that you've done along the way. So there's so many things. That's why I was stumped in answering that last question. I don't know how much of a real impact that I have had, but I'm glad that because of the fundamental law of justice, truth, and equality, I've stood on that in this particular season, and I pray that God is well pleased with the works that I have done in the Fulton County area, as well as how this work is now spreading not only across the United States, but even now across the globe.
Charles, your experience both on the front lines and behind the scenes of law enforcement gives you a unique perspective with everything happening in the world today: rising crime, debates on policing, calls for reform. What message do you want to leave with our listeners about the future of law enforcement, crime prevention, and community safety?
In this month of, um, or during this time of Ramadan,
Yeah,
I reflect back upon, and I don't inflict this upon people again that are not Islamic or what have you, but I just want you to hear the wisdom of a surah from the Quran that says, "Consider the time. Surely man is at loss, except those who believe and do good and enjoin one another to truth and enjoin one another to patience." Just as you have done with me, sir, in this broadcast, I don't get the chance to answer authentic, holistic questions like this off the so for you to be able to allow me to come and to express, while it may be long-winded, I hope that people will take what I have said not as Charles Rambo's experiences, but make it life applications and real-world applications inside of your workplaces. I have to be honest. I did not know that I was going to be able to make this particular podcast. As you can hear, maybe in my voice, I became very sick over this past weekend, and I did not know I was going to make it. But I got my strength back in time enough in order to come and to share this word with you guys. Um, so, again, enjoining one another to truth and to patience is that when we can come to the room, we have our ideas, we have our lofty goals, but where is the truth in terms of it being relevant to community as opposed to just self-serving? We have to come across a common agenda, particularly amongst Black communities, in order to bring ourselves up to a standard where we are now a world power. And that's not based upon a political power, that's not based upon a religion, that's based upon our culture, our humanity that says the kings and queens that we so much were amongst our ancestors, we are now reconnecting back to that mindset to solve the problems of our communities, to give a better future to our children. And it has to be free or minimized from criminal activity, else otherwise perpetual cycles will continually happen, and we'll keep revisiting these conversations well after me and you are gone. So peace be unto you, sir, to your audience, uh, and again, that the truth and patience that we have shared here, I would love to come back when I'm feeling that much more well, and can be just as much as an audacious rebel to trade even more burning talking points. But I think that this has served as a foundation for people to now do their own qualified research, not just to base upon your qualified questions and my life experiences, but now how can you actually go out and put these things into evidence-based practices?
indeed. Charles, I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and powerful insights. It's really rare to have someone who not only understands crime and justice from an enforcement perspective, but also recognize the deeper social issues and systemic factors at play. Your work in law enforcement, intelligence, and reform has been invaluable, not just in Georgia, but as a blueprint for transformation and anywhere in the world. For those who want to dive deeper into your work and stay updated on your insights and contributions, where can people find you online, or how can people connect with you?
Yes, thank you. I'm getting myself back to rebranding myself. You can, after this recent campaign, you can connect with me on my website, at criminaljusticelearning.online. I am a subject matter expert on all things law enforcement, particular towards the office of sheriff. I do serve as an expert witness for cases. If you need qualified insights about a current case, uh, whether that deals with in labor relations, administration, or in operations, feel free to reach out at me, at Charles at rambosolutions.com. And now that I'm back able to get on my feet and understanding the social media game a little bit more intuitive, you can also connect with me on all aspects of social media at Legal Edge 6, LEGALSIX. Excuse me, no, I'm going to go back. Excuse me. Legal Edge, LEGALAD, EDGE, and 6. Spell it out, 6. Legal Edge 6 on all social media. I will be coming back to make some very informative posts. I'm also a accredited seminar provider. I will be providing some webinars that you can connect to, as well as some free resources that your audience and across the globe will be able to reach out and to connect with. So this is a body of work just beyond podcasts. This is something I'm committed to from the cradle to the grave.
Well, all your links would be identified in the description on this video below. So people just click on it and they'll be able to connect with you. Now, to all my listeners, this conversation isn't just about understanding crime. It's about what we do with this knowledge. And Charles outlined that said thing, there must be application. How can we take these insights and apply them to our own communities is what's important. What role do we each play in creating a safer and more just societies? If you found value in today's discussion, make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future episodes. This has been The Path of the Audacious Rebel. Until next time, stay informed, stay aware, and most importantly, stay audacious.
Audacious Rebel.